Then you want to record those numbers. Part of tuning is that better than it was before? Well, let me go check my notes and see where it was before. So you want to be, keeping notes along the way. Now we're going to start the engine. This is a cold start. We want to have our data stream open in front of us. We want to look at those oxygen sensors and loop status. A good oxygen sensor will come online in 15 or 20 seconds. Our stupid, that's a technical term, stupid oxygen sensor might come in at 45 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. If it's anything over like 35 seconds, 40 seconds, look at replacing the oxygen sensor, even if it's not tripping a code. 6 years, 7 years, they kind of go bad, the narrow bands. The AFRs and wide bands last a little bit longer than that, 10 years maybe. And then miles. The narrow bands are good for 90 to 120,000 miles. So either age or mileage, if it's overdue, especially if you're watching the scan tool and it's taken 40, 50, 60 seconds before it wakes up and comes online, replace the O2 sensors before you do anything else to the vehicle. And then we're going to watch loop status. When the oxygen sensors kick in, it should go into closed loop. Normal. Again, like I said, there's a bunch of different options there. And then we want to just monitor the short-term and long-term fuel trims. Watch engine coolant temperature, air temperature. Coolant temp should rise as the engine temp does. Air temp should just go up a little bit as the engine compartment warms up. If you have a cat temp reading, which started like 0406, that thing should go up really high, really fast. You want that cat temp to go up really fast because that means the catalyst is working. That means the computer's happy. That means it's going to stop dumping fuel because we're now online. And so you just kind of let it warm up to a decent operating temperature. And again, take notes. Write down, or if you have a fancy scan tool where you can capture digital data, that's even better yet. Cool toy. And then we're going to get ready. We're going to go out and we're going to do a test drive. Now, with the test drive, you might want to have somebody else drive while you monitor just for safety reasons. But what's critically important are the fuel trims. Short-term fuel trim, STFT %. That's the computer taking immediate action with the feedback system. So the XY fuel table says we should be putting out this much fuel. So the computer goes there, puts out that much fuel, then the oxygen sensor gives it feedback. Was that too much or not enough? And then the computer will adjust from that based on feedback from the oxygen sensor. And that'll show up in the fuel trims. Positive fuel trims means the computer is adding more fuel to satisfy the oxygen sensor. Negative fuel trims means that it's having to pull back fuel from those tables to satisfy the oxygen sensor. Now, over time, if the short-term fuel trims stay positive, high, 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 the long-term fuel trims will start moving positive. But as they do, then the short-term values start to come down until the short terms are pretty close to zero. So the strategy is get those short terms as close to zero as reasonable and take up the slack with the long terms. So as you're driving, you're going to see the long-term fuel trims bounce around. That doesn't mean that it's adapting that quickly to the short-term fuel trims. Because just like you have an XY table for fuel and spark, you have an XY table for your long-term fuel trims. And in this cell block, you might have a positive 3.1. That means that the computer looks up that cell in the XY fuel table, says, okay, 3 milliseconds. And then it looks up the LTFT cell there, and it says plus 3.1%. So it'll take 3 milliseconds plus whatever, about 3.1 milliseconds is what it'll actually deliver based on that. So you want to make sure that the fuel trims stay below 10. That's the goal. That's the magic number. Anything up to 10, positive or negative, the computer's just fine with that. No problemo. Between 10 and 15, the computer's a little suspicious. Once you get above 15, now the computer's looking for which code to set, frankly. So as long as you're below 10%, all is well. Now, if you go outside of that, all is not well. So again, you're going to be taking notes. The fuel trims, look at the oxygen sensor values, your MAP, mass airflow, TPS, cat temp. Just kind of keep an eye on what's going on to get a feel for what stock is. Because when you modify it and you go back out, you see something you're questioning, is that normal? Is this supposed to be doing that? So in your baseline, get to know the vehicle a little bit. Take notes, write it down. Also kind of look at your vehicle speed, compare that to the gauge, engine temperature gauge, RPM to the gauge, and just make sure everything's okay. Now, if you do have high positive fuel trims, LTFT percent sign, possible causes would be like a weak fuel pump. The fuel pump cannot deliver the proper pressure, so the computer has to fatten up the mixture in order to compensate. A clogged fuel filter would do the exact same thing. A faulty pressure regulator that bleeds too much back to the tank, again, reduces fuel pressure. So anything that would reduce fuel pressure is one possible cause for the positive fuel trims. A vacuum leak could be an intake manifold gasket, a vacuum hose, something in the PCV system. So a vacuum leak will allow air to go into the engine around the throttle plates. An exhaust leak, believe it or not, will show additional oxygen to the oxygen sensor that's not reflected by what actually came out of the combustion chamber through the exhaust manifold. So an exhaust leak will induce high long-term fuel trim percents. And believe it or not, a failing catalytic converter can do that. Now, if you have excessively low fuel trims, what could cause that? A dirty injector, one that's not quite closing properly, and it's letting extra fuel in. So then the computer tries to compensate back by reducing pulse width, and fuel trims go negative. Restricted fuel return line. You got your pressure regulator, you got a return line, and if the regulator can't get that fuel back to the tank, it just sits there in the rail, and now you have higher than stock pressure. And then the computer's saying XY table, this much fuel, shoots it in, the oxygen sensor says, whoa, baby, lean it out. And now the fuel trims go negative because of that. The fuel pressure regulator itself could not be passing it back. And then MAP sensor, vacuum leak. So you got the hose going to the MAP sensor. If the MAP sensor sees a lower vacuum, it's got a vacuum leak, so it's not getting that full impact vacuum. The computer reads that as a higher load. Lower vacuum means you got your foot in the throttle harder, higher load, and we'll try to dump more fuel. But then the catalytic converter comes back and says, hey, lean it out, too rich here. And a clogged exhaust component, catalytic converter possibly, especially with a MAP sensor equipped vehicle. If you cannot get the exhaust out, you don't have any room to bring the fresh air charge in, right? That means that your engine vacuum goes down. So again, the computer sees higher load, XY table, it's going to the higher load cell, dumping that much fuel. The oxygen sensor is like, no, you need to back it out. So MAP sensor related issues. And it could be even a faulty MAP sensor. So once we get a baseline and we've taken copious notes, then go do the modification. Pulsar plugs, magnetic heat exchanger, throw the IXRs in there, and take it back out again. And you're going to go through pretty much all the same checks. You're going to drive it, you're going to look at fuel trims the whole time, make sure oxygen sensors are happy, and that pretty much not a whole lot changed. About the only thing you're really going to see change, if it was done right, would be fuel trims. Because now the computer's seeing different combustion characteristics, and it's trying to do whatever it can within the parameters that it was programmed to do, and you'll see changes on the fuel trims. Now, it is kind of possible if you have like plus 18 or minus 18, 15, 18, 20% on the short term. Once the long-term adaptives absorb that, you may find that you're just okay. So if you take it out and you're seeing kind of high fuel trims on that maiden voyage, don't get overly concerned. Give it a thermal cycle. Bring it back to the shop, shut it off, let it sit for a couple hours overnight, take it back out again. Then look at the fuel trims again. Sometimes 3 or 4 thermal cycles will let everything settle in and you're good to go. If not, worst case, you wind up tripping a code. And make sure you check pending codes. That'll tell you the computer didn't like whatever the heck you did. Maybe you did something wrong. Maybe there was an issue that didn't show up checking codes. Your visual inspection didn't pick it up. But now you're seeing evidence that there's an issue in there that you didn't see on the baseline run. So now it's time to go in and, again, check vacuum hoses, make sure the PCV valve's clean, the idle air control motor, throttle body, just all the normal checks. And if you didn't do any kind of tune-up work, maybe it's just got a random misfire because of a spark plug that's got 85 thousandths gap because it's so wore out. You want to make sure after you modify the vehicle that it's working the way the factory engineered it. Now, if you have a 5-gas analyzer, then you want to do a baseline, you want to do the modifications, and you want to hook it up every time you go out. So if you're going out, you're seeing excessive short terms, but moderate long terms, you park it, let it sit overnight. Next day you go out again, take the 5-gas with you. And just look at the emissions section to see what all that means. So the scan tool is going to be very, very valuable on 96 and newer vehicles for making sure that everything's working properly and then making sure that the computer likes what you did. So we'll move on and we'll take a look at tuning, which is going to be kind of a lengthy section, so you have to bear with me. But that's kind of the last step. Once you've done the hardware changes, now you've got to do what it takes to reflect that with how the engine works. Fuel, spark, maybe some other things. So, see you in a few.